Joining us now is Elizabeth Bailey, a trial attorney who represents sexual assault survivors. Thank you for coming on. So why does this change in policy matter so much?
Well, the Title IX was instituted about 50 years ago, and the idea was that they had to provide grievance policies for students to come forward if they had complaints or allegations of sexual misconduct. And what the Trump rules do is really narrow the scope of that grievance process. So it dictates who and for what conduct someone can come by and complain to the university and have those grievances heard. Ultimately, what that does is make it harder for complainants. The process that is instituted by the Trump rules is more intense. It's more invasive for complainants. And in some cases, schools have the authority to institute a higher burden of proof. What we're seeing, because these were from the first Trump administration, is the impact on students is extensive. It is less complainants coming forward and a more grueling process for the complainants that do.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. When this was in place, the first administration, what trends did you see then?
The trends that were coming out of the first institution of these policies was really students going through a process that was much longer, much less administrative, and really a process that looked a lot like bringing a criminal or a civil complaint. So you had students that were going through investigations that would take years to resolve, all while still trying to be students. And then at the same time, they'd be subject to this adjudication where they would be on the stand getting cross-examined by an attorney for some reports 9 hours at a time. Really what happened is there was a barrier to entry for these complainants, and for a lot of them it just wasn't worth coming forward and going through that process.
So on the legal side of this, how will this policy change impact how sexual assaults are handled in practice now on college campuses and in the courtroom?
I think what you're going to see on college campuses is a lot more hesitancy from students to come forward and bring complaints. And that, I think, is borne out by the trends that we've seen since the first administration. But I also think there might be an unintended impact here, because you're going to see complainants who might have gone through this process just with guidance from the school, getting lawyers early and hiring lawyers to help them through this process that now has become very, very adversarial. And to that end, this process is looking a lot more like the things the students would have to go to if they decided to bring a criminal complaint or decided to bring a civil complaint. And I think an unintended consequence of this may be that students think, if I'm going to go through a process that's going to be this intense with my school, what's to stop me from bringing a criminal complaint? What's to stop me from bringing a civil complaint? And I don't know if the advocates who like these changes really anticipated that as a consequence, but I think we're going to see it more.
And as you alluded to, under these new guidelines, there are these requirements for live hearings of these sexual assault cases on college campuses with the potential for cross-examination. Expand on why that's not something many survivors want to do and how it can be traumatizing for them.
So what we saw with the Joe Biden administration and what they tried to do was to bring down the formality of these adjudications. The idea being that the investigation was going to be done by the school. During COVID, things moved to more an online format, and there was less confrontation between the survivor and who they were accusing of sexual assault or harassment. Here, there's no avoiding that. The Trump rules make it so that the accuser cannot escape being in a room with the person who they're alleging assaulted them. And so what is happening for survivors who are also going through trying to process what happened to them, they've got to then confront the person who caused the traumatic harm to them. And a lot of survivors don't want to do that, especially in the context of an administrative adjudication at their school, because that tends to happen, though longer than it used to be, much quicker than something like the criminal process. And a lot of these survivors don't have someone in their corner to protect them from an aggressive cross-examination from an accuser's attorney.
Stand by, Elizabeth, because we actually just connected with Katie Kostner, who was supposed to join you from the beginning. Katie is the executive director of Take Back the Night. She is also the first woman in the U.S. to speak out nationally and publicly as a survivor of campus date rape. Katie, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get your response to some of these free speech advocacy groups like the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, who say that, for example, these policy changes are needed, that live hearings with cross-examination are essential to maintain due process for people accused of sexual assault, given how much is at stake here. What is your response to that argument?
Absolutely, Pam, and I'm delighted to contribute. First of all, I think it's really interesting, this whole conversation, because I myself had one of the first hearings on a college campus regarding my own case. And if you all can imagine, I was seated across from the person I was accusing, and he had brought two legal representatives to the hearing, and I was there all by myself. So I'm well aware exactly front and center. And I'm also speaking as the mom of two sons. So I'm hearing all the different vantage points. And to Elizabeth's point, I would turn it in this direction. First of all, I'm concerned that there's no equity in the representation for both sides. It'd be one thing if they both had equal opportunities and equal abilities to afford some sort of representation. The second one no one is talking about is we have a criminal system, we have a civil system. Those systems are run by trained, certified, by government agencies, people who know how to use their systems. Now we have Title IX, and college campuses have no government certification. They have a private for-profit company out there that set up shop about 2 decades ago, loosely blessing those who run these hearings. And yet there's no standard really, except for what the laws say. And I know so many Title IXs, and they're befuddled with the this and that. One more point I don't think we're talking about. I was thinking, with Trump's daughter Ivanka, one of the rollbacks on these new regulations is if Trump's Ivanka was assaulted on a study abroad, or went across the street to a campus party that was just off campus and was assaulted by another student at either of those two places, she would have no rights back on her own campus to have her case heard. So a lot of these rollbacks, I think, to our discussion today, do harm the rights of victims to have equal opportunity and lots of opportunity to at least seek justice. And then it used to be called a kangaroo court. And I'll go back to, now we have a system where there's no government certification out there to say who are these hearing officers and how well are they trained, except for by a private company that's making lots of money from it. So those are my sentiments.
All right. Well, Katie, thank you for coming on to share your sentiments. And Elizabeth, we appreciate your time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela.